So welcome again to Stenton. We're in the beverage vault in the cellar, just below, even lower than the grade of the cellar. A space that was for storing beers and wines and ales, largely on these racks at the side of each room, each side of the room. Probably little wedges were used to kind of keep them from rolling. And then with them on their sides, they could be tapped and the beverages dispensed into pitchers and carried upstairs for consumption. So the room is actually supporting the brick paved entry above us, which many of you might have seen on an earlier Facebook Live tour. And you can see that the cellar foundations are laid of stone, but then this vault, the brick part sort of springs up at the midline. And this was built with quite wide pine boards to create the arched frame over which the bricks were laid. And here in the center, you can pick up some of the seams where showing the width of those boards and even in some cases the impression of the pine board in the plaster and mortar above. We also still have some of the original iron hooks in the ceiling used to kind of hang anything that might need to be preserved or kept handy in this space. The cellar is also a space that's very much open to the air. This is one of its more closed spaces, but it still has two vents to the outside, which you can see on either side of the stairs into the house at the front. So the cellar spaces were definitely somewhat modified over time, and there's a flexibility to the layout of these kind of wooden closets. We know there would have been doors here because there are pintles, but we're not entirely sure what each one of these spaces would have been used for. In the first generation, 1730s to 1750s, we know all the glassware, tinware, earthenware, and lumber, sort of extraneous things, was stored down here. So we assume one of these closets probably is a glassware closet for clean glassware, and this may be the one. It has a vent, it had a door, vents on the side, and you may be able to pick up in the whitewash and the board partition wall where there were shelves. So this is a place that somewhat valuable glass, breakable glass, could be kind of kept stored and kept clean for use. And we also know originally this opening was a bulkhead. A bulkhead is a door, an exterior entrance to the cellar like this one here. This is a newer one, but having had one here at the back, we're going to look at where the original kitchen is in this direction, no longer extant. But throughout this part of the cellar, there are many wrought iron hooks, again, for hanging supplies or food itself for use. You're always wanting to keep things up off the ground in the cellar. I'm not sure, I think all the footprints you're going to see today are human, but we do sometimes have little creature footprints still down here. And this sort of very sandy soil would have been kept quite packed, and there probably would have been lime in here as part of the lime washing treatment that would have happened to the walls in here to have this be a cleanable, sort of space that one could look after. So here by this bulkhead now, though, is our service stair, which you may have seen last week on the tour, coming all the way down to the cellar. And again, we're not completely clear on what was stored in the front rooms. We now have our archaeological collection stored here, but this room, unlike the one under the parlor, this one has a row of these niches, again, which things can be stacked in and stored in quite easily in the wall. And full advantage is taken of this space in the fireplace supports, which is quite typical of 18th century construction. To in this case, there are not shelves in there, but some of the other ones are used as closets. One of the other distinctive features of Stenton's cellar, and there don't seem to be a lot of other early American precedents, maybe more in England or other parts of the United Kingdom, but this is a wine rack, and these bottle shelves were found in the 1980s just kind of in a stack over under the present staircase. And so at the time, this is in the wake of the historic structure report for Stenton in the 1980s. This closet was recreated and the racks were hung. So you would have actually had wine bottles, clean wine bottles could be kept upside down and drained and clean until you might decant directly from the casks in the beverage cellar into the wine bottles. We think, however, these were mounted upside down and the gravity is having this impact of kind of weighing down some of the slats. And then one of the other interesting features of the cellar, and it's, I think you could say it's in a sort of ruined state, is the George and Deborah Logan dairy is in here. It's the only space in the cellar that's paved with brick. The herringbone brick pattern is repeated down here. And there was, we believe, a spring-fed trench along the rear wall with cool water running through for setting up pans of milk. And there's still a terracotta, kind of a little gutter pipe or drain pipe at the far end that is part of what suggests that. And there would have been shelves over top of the trench. And if you aim down at that wall, you get a good view of where the plaster came up against shelving again, so more dairy and so forth could be stored over that cool zone of the cellar. And then up at the ceiling level, there were hanging shelves, and there were 4 of these racks all together down here. So you'd lay a board across from end to end, and then things like cheeses could be put up to age in this space. And again, going lower than the grade to take advantage of the coolness. Sorry about the Halloween exhibit that's still in there. But this is our our root cellar here that goes out underground outside of the confines of the house. And we will show you from above, there's a little hatch here that leads into the first floor lodging room, which presumably might have facilitated moving things from the dairy or from this root cellar to the upstairs. So we're going to head actually up the present-day bulkhead out to the rear yard. So you're thinking of this zone at the back of the house. Where the original kitchen and wash house were situated. So this pump actually marks part of the confines of the original kitchen. We believe that the well was inside the kitchen, which certainly facilitated easy access to water all times of the year. And so that here there was a kitchen and a second attached building known as the wash house. And then just beyond that, near the opening in the boxwood, was a cistern for collecting rainwater for the laundry. And ultimately that cistern was filled in by about 1760 with many of the artifacts, the archaeological artifacts you've already seen. So we're thinking about the food axis. We're out here in the zone behind the house. We've come out of the cellar where the food is stored into the kitchen where the food is prepped and cooked. And I'm just going to read to you a little bit from the first generation, the James Logan inventory, taken in 1752. And unlike many of the other rooms, the kitchen, wash house, and cellars are lumped together. So there is an old clock, probably used to turn the clock and jack, and iron, shovel, and tongs, basic fireplace equipment. I hope everyone can hear over the sirens. Iron pots and kettles, pot hooks and racks, brass kettle, two, I think it says bell kettles and skillets, maybe bell metal, 2 tea kettles, coffee pot and chafing dish, copper stew pan and warming pan, 9 old iron candlesticks. So this is in addition to the brass candlesticks that were in the house, in the back dining room. 9 steel yard, box irons and sad irons. Those are from the laundry room. Frying pans, a Dutch oven, wooden mortars and pine tables. And then the final thing is the glass, tin, earthenware, tubs and lumber in the cellar. So it gives you a sense for kind of what was in these spaces, and we'll actually look at a clock jack when we go into the kitchen. So the kitchen we're going into is the 3rd generation kitchen from the 1780s, but we do think it's possible that this part of the building, this kitchen part of the building, does date to the 1730 finishing of the house. The joists underneath this kitchen do not run in the same direction as the joists under the wash house. This entire sort of building actually has had its grade also raised up. So it's not functioning at its original height. But you get the sense for the large hearth, fire back for helping to create radiant heat. And there was originally an oven in the side of this hearth. And a hearth to cook on a hearth, you use the andirons and build up a fire and create lots of hot coals that can be distributed to create little burners in the hearth, in the way that you think of maybe your own stove probably has 4 burners, and you can control a range of heat and size heat on those. You use these little piles of coals to get the temperature desired to produce something. And then this is the clock jack. So it uses the same mechanism as a clock with a weight then to create tension and turn a spit here on which things like pigs and poultry can be roasted. But it takes away the labor of having to turn the spit. So it's a kind of automatic innovation that really was a sign of, again, kind of a certain wealth in the Atlantic world in the time that Stenton would have been furnished in the 1730s. And this is one of our archaeological milk pans. So you can imagine this actually being brought up, maybe some fresh milk brought up. And these are the kinds of pans that would be sitting in that trench in the dairy. And it's a gentle one, but you can see the pouring spout here at the left, my left. And this sort of little cupboard was not original, but it's up above this area of the hearth that the smoking chamber I alluded to last week is, and that's for smoking meats. I realize I didn't clarify that on last week's tour. The current dresser, the built-in shelving here, was installed in the 1980s over the ghosts of old shelving. One of the things that was done is that the central section actually closed over a window, and we have plans to return that window. One would not want to reduce light in a kitchen, so the shelving may have actually run right across the window, but you're seeing a sampling of many of our earthenware, some salt glazed stoneware, our bottles, all from the archaeological collection, all that came from that cistern near the original wash house. I'm also on display in this room. We have the 3 Logan Norris, they're not entirely fully identified as to owners, manuscript cookbooks or receipt books that are in our collection. This is SL Receipt for Mince Pies. We think this early book that has a print of Queen Anne on the front may have belonged to James Logan's wife, Sarah Reed Logan. And then in conjunction with that, we have a number of sort of faunal exhibits out of our archaeological collection as well. So we have rabbit, to pot hair, to collar veal. We have a jawbone. Looking at another cookbook, our turtle shell is also interesting. There's a lot of turtle soup eaten in Philadelphia, some goose and duck beaks surviving, bits of eggshell. And then the more medicinal side, this is a 19th century book, Receipts for Pickling, Preserving, Cooking, and Quacking. The quacking is the medicinal side. It has nothing to do with the duck. And you're seeing some of our pharmaceutical bottles, medicinal salve pots, and so forth. And James Logan was in tremendous pain at the end of his life. He had fallen on the ice in 1728, and we suspect that the high volume of medicine bottles has to do with his medication of a lot of tremendous pain throughout the 20 years that he lived here at Stenton. So let's head over into the ground floor of the main house. Actually, before we do that, I just want to take you by this door, which is now painted shut. So we can't actually go through this and experience the full food axis, but if you could imagine the kitchen, again, where the preparation is happening, and then there's a sort of a shed probably that connects the kitchen to the main house, and we speculate that because this does not have a bolection, a sort of bold, curvy frame like the other two doors do on the back side of the house. We suspect this was not designed to be seen. And then these ghosts of seats, so a back and a seat here, actually on either side, so that enslaved or indentured workers would sit here and be called to work in the kitchen or called to work in the house, that there's this sort of interstitial space here at this door, and it's kind of angling into the house. And the name of this tour, I just wanted to mention, we named it after this book called The Food Axis by Elizabeth Collins Cromley, Cooking, Eating, and the Architecture of American Houses. And she has visited historic Germantown and given talks within, it may be 7 or 8 years that she gave a talk at Wick, and she's given a talk at Cliveden. So we rely very much on some of her theories about how architecture and food fit together.
When was the door painted shut and why?
I assume that the door was painted shut in 1900 when Stenton opened as a museum, and that's also when the service stair no longer went down to the cellar, and so there's a sense of this is going to be a museum and a sense of increased security. So originally on the ground floor there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 operable doors, but in an age that's pre-alarm systems and things like that, if you're trying to keep the building very secure, to not have all the doors operate was a way of kind of controlling the space. And so I don't know for fact that it was in 1900, but I suspect that the museumizing of the house is what caused the doors to be painted shut. And you can see as we head in here the sort of very curvy frame of the central door. So we're going to spend a little bit of time in the back dining room, and this is the largest space on the ground floor actually, but it's also architecturally the least kind of well articulated. It doesn't have those, what I just mentioned, the bolection molded panels that we've seen in the entry and the parlor and the better rooms upstairs that we've seen on this tour. Instead, it has these flat inset panels, which with a simpler molded frame, so they're not raised away from the wall. The other thing that's unique about this space in this house is its very large fireplace, which it looks like it would accommodate cooking. And so this was studied quite intensively during the Stenton Historic Structures Report investigation in 1982. And I've sometimes had questions. It's Reed, Engel, and John Dickey's firm who did this report. and did a lot of innovative things at the time, like take x-rays, but they actually excavated this fireplace. It had been somewhat infilled to make it smaller and work better as a heating fireplace in the 19th century. And as I mentioned in the cellar, there was the wood kind of cover that fit here so that a stove was installed here in the 19th century. But going back to its original opening, what they hoped that they would find architectural evidence for saying this was the kitchen in this house, and the house didn't have a separate kitchen. But they did not find evidence for a crane. That would be the iron swinging rack, so you could cook on it, nor did they find something called a trammel in this chimney, which is also for hanging pots up in the chimney. And so it's our hypothesis still that all the very heavy cooking was done outside the house. The heavy labor and the smells, the fire risk, was kept sort of unseen out of the main house, and that this could be for warming. So you could still set up little small fires on this hearth and do a little bit of cooking and keep things warm. There's also a very curious feature that not ever really solved this mystery, but there's a grill on the side, and it has a clean out vent below, so that coals could be put in there, and there was a door, things could be quite heated up, and you can see there's quite a bit of creosote in there, and it would self-clean out. And as I say, we've never completely understood how that functioned or why. So if anyone out there watching has some ideas, we're always interested. But this fireplace and the first floor lodging room fireplace, the two fireplaces on the back side of the house on the ground floor, also have these curious vents, which may have to do with allowing heat to rise into the side passages to be captured somehow. But this would have all been behind a fire back. So given that there's a functionality to this fireplace, it also is the only fireplace in the house with a mantel shelf. So this is a practical place and it has has several different grooves, which we're taking advantage of to display this Norris, Dickinson, and Logan family pewter, some of which is in our collection and some of it's on loan to us from the State Museum collection, the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, and some from the Fairmount Park Commission. So we're really grateful to have these family pieces on display here. And adding to the pewter, we know, according to the inventory, there were 60 pewter plates stored on the pewter press. And this is on loan also from the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission and came down through a Logan descendant. So there were quite sure this is probably the pewter press that was here in the back dining room, and there's a post about it in our curator's cabinet of curiosities on the website. But you can zero in a little bit. The camera is going to show you some of the engraving. So we have SL for Sarah Logan, and that could be Sarah Reed Logan or her daughter. We also have HE for Hannah Emlyn. That's William Logan's wife, the woman who owned Dinah as part of her dowry, and the Stag's Head crest for the Logan family. So there's a range of things here. It's also interesting to think about the fact that the pewter has sometimes it's family heraldry in effect, but often has women's ciphers or initials, and that this is part of the female purview. The mistress of Stenton is going to oversee the enslaved and indentured workers who cook in the kitchen. They're going to confer and plan meals and making sure the house has got the provisions necessary to do all the things and the entertaining that they are going to do in a season. So 60 pewter plates allows them to serve a lot of people, in addition to all the Chinese porcelain and silver that was stored in the parlor. So big point too really is that the parlor has all that most fine dining equipment, and this is a lower everyday grade of dining equipment, but on a scale that could suit a public. So how was this back dining room used? Seems like it was a kind of family dining space, but a space where even eggs could be cooked right here for breakfast, or porridges and things like that could be kept ready. So that's an everyday kind of room, and a space that we think workers and family members very much intersected and kind of planned the days. A lot of work could take place here, so that you could almost imagine James Logan in his crippled state taking advantage of the couch and dictating to maybe his plantation manager or another clerk, making sure that the accounts and ledgers are in good order. So there's a lot that happened in this room all at once. And this is that door again that led to the original kitchen. So you had the kitchen, and then if you were having your best equipment going and entertaining important guests in the parlor, things could be kept warm here. And then a servant can actually stand in this pantry cupboard. It really is a space one can step into, use the countertop, bring down plates, serve up the food. And then it goes across the back of the hall into the dumbwaiter closet. And the camera is going to give you a good glimpse into the passage here, where it's been changed to become a decorative cupboard, but originally had straight shelves to take the food. And all of that serving would again take place unseen behind this door. So there's one little last hatch we were going to show you in the house, and it's unclear whether this is an original opening or a slightly later addition, maybe when the dairy was changed to be the space under here, but we do have this little hatch near the root cellar that would have made it easier to bring things kind of up into the house. And certainly the hinges that are on it now are not as old as most of the other hinges throughout the house. So after all of that food and drink was consumed, there was something else, another outbuilding that was necessary. And Stenton's extant privy dates to about 1800 and allows for multiple use at the same time. So chamber pots and things like that would be used through the night, but those who were able could make their way to the privy, so that the main chamber has two holes, and the one at the rear is just a single. But it allows for a level of privacy to have multiple chambers in the privy. So that concludes our food access tour for today. I hope you've all enjoyed it. We're happy to take a few questions if any come in here at the end.
Is there a log of how many servants and enslaved workers worked at Stenton?
Well, there's not a log, and we don't have, we wish we had sort of a single list. But we've been doing a lot of research so that we know in the first couple of generations, given the names that we know and the amount of space that's here, that the combination of enslaved and indentured workers generally in the house was around 10 people. All right, well, thank you all for coming today. We appreciate your continuing to follow us on these tours, and we enjoy showing you spaces you might not necessarily always get to see on a more typical Stenton visit, such as, in this case, the cellar. So have a good afternoon.